Your Dog's Friend is a nonprofit 501c3 whose mission is to help keep dogs out of shelters by educating and supporting their humans. We promote positive method of training and behavior modification through stress-free methods. As part of that mission, we offer free webinars like the one you're about to watch. Subjects range from dog behavior, stress-free training, and other tools to help you understand your relationship with your dog. If you like the webinar, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Click the notification bell and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be notified when future videos are posted. Now enjoy the webinar.
My name is Juliana DeWillems. I'm going to be your speaker for today. But first, I want to give a huge thank you to Your Dog's Friend, the nonprofit organization that puts on these webinars, that is hosting me and hosts many other brilliant trainers and behavior professionals. They, like I said, are a nonprofit, so please check them out on social media, yourdogsfriend.org. They've got incredible resources no matter where you are, and especially if you're in the DC area. So thank you, Your Dog's Friend. So again, my name is Juliana DeWillems, and I am going to be talking to you today about your dog listening. You might notice that I tweaked the title of the presentation because I am not in the business of making dogs do things. I am in the business of influencing and increasing the chances of. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get started, I'm going to tell you really quick a little bit about JW Dog Training, my business. We're in Northern Virginia. We're a small private training company, though we do help folks with behavior modification all over the country and actually all over the world, thanks to virtual training, which is a huge resource for pet parents. And we deal with everything from new puppies to crazy teenagers to behavior issues like reactivity, aggression, that type of thing. And I helping pet parents like you all understand your dog better, live more harmoniously with your dog, build a better bond is truly it's the best part of my job. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of stuff today. And I love when you all ask questions, so ask questions in the chat. And to get you all warmed up with using the chat window, if you could please share where you're watching from, because we get folks from all over the world with these webinars, which is just incredible. And we'd love to see where you are watching from today. Oh, good job. Thank you, everyone. I see you all chiming into the chat window. So my chat window is to the side over here. So when you see me looking to the side, that's because I'm looking at your chat. Wow, you guys are doing great. And I saw Germany, which is so cool. Lots of locals here in Maryland. Very cool. Thank you, everyone. And please ask questions about the content. So the one thing that I'm going to ask is that when it comes to my dog questions, meaning questions about kind of your specific dog with your specific circumstances, I ask you to either phrase it in a way that's general, that everyone could benefit from, or my contact information will be at the end. And there will also be times for questions at the end. If you could please put it off till either we've got question time at the end or email me about it, because it's really important that we get through all the content and that we talk about information and topics that apply to everyone who's here watching, because we've got some amazing, amazing numbers. A lot of you are watching today, and I want to make sure everyone benefits. So please ask questions about the content and save my dog questions. Thank you. All right. So we're going to talk about listening today. And this was a really interesting presentation for me to work on. So I first gave this presentation about probably 3 years ago, and I think it's a great topic, but some of my ideas and mindsets about my training and the way that I train and the things that I recommend have changed. So it was kind of fun to update this accordingly. And we're just going to be talking a lot about kind of the human canine bond today. And I think you're going to get a lot out of it. All right. Okay. So feels like your dog isn't a great listener. So this is a slide, obviously, with a bunch of pictures of dogs doing doggy things. And They're having a blast. They are sniffing, playing with other dogs, greeting people, chasing wildlife. These are obviously things that we are all familiar with dogs doing. And clearly the dogs are enjoying themselves. And then there's us. And it feels like we're doing this so much of the time. Pay attention to me, listen to me, look over here. Hello. Like, we are just constantly trying to get our dog's attention. And if you're here watching, there's probably a chance that either some of the time or most of the time, we don't have the best luck. So know that this is very normal and you are not alone. And while this is a very normal problem to have, I totally understand your frustrations. And I totally understand how it feels like your dog is just living their life and couldn't care less about you. Yes, their webinar will be recorded, by the way. All of these and all of the great webinars from Your Dog's Friend are on YouTube. So the first thing that I want to do is define listening. This is critical because when we start talking about dog training concepts and things we want our dogs to do, ways we want our dogs to behave, they're often labels. They're either labels, they can also be constructs. Like it's kind of a human defined and created idea. So it's so important to define what exactly does listening mean? If you kind of break it down, when I started to ask myself this, I was like, wait a second. Yeah, what is listening? Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? So it's really important to ask yourself, what does listening mean to you when it comes to your dog? What does it look like? Does it mean your dog is paying attention to you 100% of the time? Does it mean that they respond to you 100% of the time? Does it mean doing whatever you ask them to do? Does it mean responding to cues correctly? And depending on where your answer lies here, I might tell you, okay, that's a realistic expectation. Okay, that's not so realistic. Remember, we're working with humans. We are working with living beings here. So expecting our dogs to be kind of at our beck and call 100% of the time, probably not super likely. But if you were to say, yeah, I kind of just want them to pay attention to me when I need them, that would make a little bit more sense. So to us, when I thought about what does listening mean to me, it means that our dogs respond to known cues around a variety of distractions. So basically, I want to be able to say, hey, Fluffy, come touch, which is like a targeting cue, or maybe, hey, Fluffy, come here, if my recall cue, and I want Fluffy to be able to respond regardless of where we are or what we're doing. That would be kind of my broad ideal goal. And there are two things that stand out in this goal. One of those is known cues, and the other is distractions. And when you look at it from that perspective, that I've got known cues that I want my dog to know and understand and be able to respond to around distractions, that kind of clears my goal up really nicely. It gives me exactly what I'm working towards. And it also puts it much more into kind of a training perspective than into this vague, loose, my dog is simply not listening to me. Again, we go from this big complaint to this very narrowed down goal with clear things that we're working towards. So, and this was a really helpful exercise for me to do to define listening for myself. And I encourage you all later after this to really think about, what does it mean to me for my dog to listen to me? So here's the thing. Dogs do what works for them. To put a label on it, they are opportunistic. They do what gets them access to stuff they like, and they don't do stuff that they don't enjoy doing. And that is just the facts. Dogs are dogs. They have species-specific needs, instincts, and motivators. They need to chew. They are often hardwired to chase wildlife. They often love playing with their doggy friends. The dog world and the human world are two totally opposite experiences. They are two totally opposite worlds. And we are so frequently saying to dogs, don't be a dog. Live in my human world with these human expectations, even though you have these genetic drives and instincts to do certain things. And I'm here to tell you, you certainly cannot wish away, will away, train away a lot of genetic instincts. And in fact, I don't think it would be fair to do so. I think dogs are dogs, and it's really, really important to understand them and meet their needs. But after realizing that dogs are dogs and they have all these species-specific needs, we then realize we're competing against these all the time. And again, coming back to human world versus dog world, what we want versus what they want, it's often we're butting heads and we are just on two different pages of what an ideal day and what an ideal life can look like. The fact of the matter is that dogs learn that listening to their human is simply not worth it in a lot of scenarios. You see, to totally anthropomorphize, you see the dog have like the two bubbles that pop up. Respond to my human and come over to them, or chase after the deer that I just saw whiz by. And you see the wheels fit and they're like, yeah, I'm going to chase the deer. And there's a ton of factors that go into that, all stuff we're going to talk about today. But you have to just, you really have to take the kind of taking it personally out of it and just understand your dog is doing what they want to do in that moment. And what they want to do is going to be driven by their instincts and a number of other things. It's not like we've got like part wolves walking around. That's not what I want you to necessarily realize, but there is, I highly recommend everyone read Kim Brophey's book, Meet Your Dog, because it really gets to the bottom of a lot of what our dogs were bred for and a lot of what goes into the personality and temperament of the dog that's in your home. Really, really great book. So the thing is, listening is not a training issue. I mean, listening is a training issue. Let me see if I can got to get this thing out of the way. Okay. Listening is a training issue. The responsibility, is on you, the pet parent. Thank you. Nicole shared a link to Kim Brophey's book in the chat. So I really need to tell you guys up front, I am not a trainer who does owner blaming, who says you're causing your dog's issues, who, you have to be better or your dog will never be better. I never come to the table with that type of attitude or with those types of accusations. But it also is very important to take the responsibility off of our dogs and put it back on ourselves to ask ourselves, have we done everything we can here to help our dogs be successful and help them understand what they need to be doing right now? And there's a saying in the training world, the rat is always right. And what that means is that our dogs, if they're doing something naughty, or if they're doing not even naughty, because I don't like necessarily to label behaviors like that, they're just doing what works for them. If they're doing something we don't like, then we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the motivator behind that behavior? What am I possibly contributing to that? What can I do to help my dog be more successful here? Having a lens of, oh, my dog is being bad, and versus having a lens of, oh no, what could I possibly be doing different to support my dog better and help them make better choices? They're going to lead you to two very different kind of mindsets with your dog, relationships with your dog. And I'm of the opinion that I think it's really important that we take the responsibility back. We are the humans in the relationship, and we are the ones with the opposable thumbs, and we can make a lot of changes and have a much bigger influence. So, one important training concept that is extremely important to understand, and I promise I will not bore you with training jargon or training concepts really too much, but the concept that positive reinforcement is important because reinforcement drives behavior, whether you're intending it to or not. So here's the thing. You have a behavior and you add something that your dog likes. And I say you, I shouldn't even say you. Something happens after the behavior that your dog likes. you are going to see more of that behavior. And this is so critical to remember for a number of reasons. One, it empowers you to say, okay, well, these are the behaviors I want to see more of. So how can I make sure I'm reinforcing them? And it helps you identify, wow, I really don't like these behaviors. What reinforcement is occurring here to have the behavior continue? Because behavior does not happen for no reason. There is always a reinforcement behind it, whether it's coming from you or from the environment. And understanding that, wrapping your head around that, the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can start to sort out what exactly is at play here for these behaviors that we don't like, or these behaviors that we want to see more of, but maybe we're not. So here's the thing. I am not going to sit here and tell you how to train all these behaviors today. Eye contact, responding to their name, attention. I'm not here to tell you, we're not going to spend our time going over how to train these behaviors, because there's a number of ways that you can figure out how to train these things and how to proof them and how to work around them. I'm going to tell you where kind of the training can then fall apart. And depending on the dog, there's going to be a number of different ways you can teach things. So that's not what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to instead talk about kind of what happens after you train the behaviors, but here are some options for where you can go to learn behaviors and how to, give your dog more cues and more behaviors to work to your advantage. So group classes are amazing. They're a great way to learn a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, practice around distractions. Those can be really good options. Of course, I'm a huge advocate for your dog's friends group classes, but check your local group classes. There's a lot of virtual group classes that are really good and beneficial. And then, of course, with a qualified trainer, which usually means certified with experience in the behavior you're working on, in-home private lessons, that's what we do. And then also virtual training. Virtual training is a huge, great way to get help quickly and from a good trainer, even if they're not close to you or you're not close to a good trainer. So keep that in mind while we work on all this, or while we kind of go through this presentation. You do still have to teach your dog these behaviors, but I'm going to talk about kind of once you do know behaviors, or you think, oh, my dog does know sit and touch and come and all this stuff. And why isn't Fluffy responding when we're out and about? Which I think is why most of you are here. So if you've taught behaviors, or once you go down the road of teaching new behaviors, you're going to realize that the steps to building reliable behaviors are basically you get the behavior, you name it, and we're going to talk about that. You heavily reinforce it, and then you go and you practice around distractions. And sounds pretty simple, right? So where does this all fall apart? Why does the process of teaching and proofing a behavior seem simple, but at the end of the day, when you're at the park with Fluffy, they're not responding to you? So there are a lot of factors that cause dogs not to listen. So a lack of understanding, meaning they literally have no idea what you're asking. There could be a number of reasons for this, and we're going to go over kind of some of the main ones in a little bit, but literally not knowing what you're asking for in that moment is a huge contributor to obviously why our dogs do not respond. Confusion. They might be thinking, are they asking for this cue? Am I supposed to be doing this? Where they might sort of know, but they're confused. Stress, whether it's from the environment or unfortunately from you, Fluffy, do the thing, and repeating your cues, getting more intense. That can be stressful. I don't know how to get the right answer. Excitement, again, whether that's from the environment or just from whatever you're doing with them in that moment, they're really excited. Frustration. So they are like, oh, I really want what you have, but I don't know how to get it. I want it. Or, maybe frustration in the environment. They want to get to the other dog. They want to go play. Their frustration can be at play. Fear, of course, is a big one. So whether they're scared of the environment and this one is really stinks, but can happen a lot. They're scared of you. So if they're afraid of you, which again, we're going to talk about, that can really impact their ability to respond correctly. And then pain. So again, whether your dog is in pain, maybe they have like some hip issues, they've got a stomach ache that day, Or unfortunately, if you're using any training devices that cause pain, prong collars, shock collars, those can also impact if, how, and when a dog will listen. So all of these things cause a decrease in the response. So you might get an incorrect response, you might get a slow response, or you might get no response at all. And as you can see, there are a ton of factors that could be happening. And the thing is, all of these factors, these are all the same ones, they are often caused by human error. So there's good news and bad news here. Actually, I would argue it's only good news, is that you, as much as you think you can control your dog, they are a living creature. And yes, you can influence them. But at the end of the day, they're a sentient being. And hopefully none of you are going through any crazy measures to truly control them. You really can only kind of influence and hope for the best, but you can 100% control yourself. You, as a pet parent, can control what you do, how you do it, and you have full control over how you do things, which again, I hope you find as good news, because that means that there's a lot of things that you can change and improve to hopefully help your dog then improve as well. So again, I actually do all of my training with what's called errorless, meaning I don't like pointing out errors, but I am, for the sake of this talk, I'm going to point out 10 errors that humans make. And then, of course, because I am a positive reinforcement trainer, I don't like to focus on what I don't like. I will definitely give you a replacement better behavior to do instead of the error that you might be doing right now. And I wish there was a different word besides error, because error feels like you knew what you were supposed to do, but you made an error. And the thing is, a lot of you don't know what you're supposed to do. So you're trying your best, and you might accidentally be doing something that is hindering your progress or is making it not possible for your dog to get the right answer. And I just need you to know that none of this is coming from a place of judgment or a place of you should have done better. I'm simply pointing out as quickly and nicely as I can what you did, what humans often do wrong, and then very quickly shifting to like, well, hey, look at all this stuff that you can do instead to get better results. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is that we often don't teach what the actual cue means. So first of all, what is a cue? You've heard me say it already a bunch of times. A cue is basically a signal to your dog that if they do the corresponding behavior, there's an opportunity for them to earn reinforcement. If I say sit and you put your butt on the ground, you get a treat. If I say come and you come to me, I play a game of tug. So a cue means there is an opportunity for you to earn something that you like. There's an opportunity for you to get something you like if you do the behavior that you know is attached to this cue. A lot of people will call them commands, but I am, again, not in the business of commanding a dog to do anything. I like cues because they are kind of they're a request, they're an invitation for participation. And because I train in a way that my dogs love to participate with me, my dogs are usually pretty eager to respond to cues. Cues can be hand signals or words. And actually cues can be many other things. They can be environmental, tactile, smells, all that stuff. But for the sake of this presentation, we'll say that they are usually hand signals and or words. And that could, again, mean sit, or it could mean raising your hand up in the sit, motion, or down. A lot of people do touch, put their fingers out, or a flat palm. So keeping in mind that a cue is whatever you decide for it to be. And then it's really important to then attach the behavior to it. So unfortunately, one accidental error can be assuming or expecting that your dog knows what a cue means. And we get in trouble for this way more than you would think, because understandably, we almost start to assume that our dogs can speak English and that they just know what we're trying to say. But it turns out we actually did not teach them what come means. We have not taught them what stay means. We're just kind of assuming that because we know what it means and we say it enough that they must know what it means, right? So during the training process, you have to attach cues to behaviors. And I'm going to talk about how to do that in a second. But that is how a dog learns, oh, sit means put my butt on the ground. Down means put my belly on the floor. Come means run over to you. Dogs have to be able to perceive the cue and understand what behavior is attached to it. And when they don't know that connection, or we assume they know it and they don't actually know it quite as well as we think, that's when, of course, we give the cue and they're like, I actually don't know what you're asking. So when we don't make sure that, let me put this up here. When we don't make sure that they understand what the word means and then generalize that word in different contexts, then of course, if we say, what's like a more, maybe like some people will say with me, or maybe leave it's a good one. It's like a little more, a little less traditional. We don't say it as often. We kind of just wait to say it when we need it. And so we say, leave it. And our dog is like, I have never heard that word before, So it's so important to teach cues and what behavior they are intended to match with. So this is an example of me using a cue that this dog has never heard of. I'm trying to teach her, I'm trying to use heel. You can see I say the word, I pat my leg. She's trying to figure it out. And you'd be surprised. You might be thinking, well, wait a second, why are you trying to use a cue that you've never taught? Well, we actually do it quite a bit. Again, it might be with more traditional cues like maybe come or stay, but we are constantly trying to ask our dogs to do things that we have not actually taught them. Okay, so what you should do instead is teach what a cue means. And this typically happens during the training process. So you might be surprised to hear that you get behavior first and you don't say a word and you don't use a hand signal. You get the behavior first, and then you add a cue to it once the dog is doing the behavior. And how you get behavior, there's a number of ways to do that. You can lure, you can capture, you can shape. Again, that's kind of for whatever avenue you decide to go down to learn how to teach your dog these things. But you get the behavior first, and then as your dog is doing it, you say the word. That's called attaching the cue. And then each repetition, you say the word a little sooner. That's called backing the cue up. So initially, an example, super simple example would be sit. You say, you get the behavior. Maybe you're doing food over the nose. They get the treat as soon as their butt hits the ground. And then they're standing. And then as soon as their butt hits the ground, sit, they get a treat. Sit, they get a treat. But then you say it a little sooner each time. So then you're able to say, sit, they sit down, you give them a treat. Where this goes south, I see a lot like when people are trying to teach down and they're just saying the word over and over again, maybe trying to use a hand signal. And I can tell you that's a really great way for your dog to think that down means stand and stare at you or sit and stare at you, right? Because it depends. It's whatever behavior is happening while they hear that word. The same is for like come. If you haven't actually taught it, you might be saying fluffy, come. And they sure as heck start to think that come means stand at the other side of a field and stare at you. So you need to be really, really intentional about pairing the word with the behavior or the hand signal with the behavior in the teaching process. So when your dog doesn't respond to a cue, you really have to ask yourself, well, wait a second, have I actually taught them this word? Have I taught them that leave it means turn your head away from the object and look at me? And if so, have I taught it in this context? Because dogs are masters of context. Like humans, we can learn how to drive a car and then drive a Toyota and a Honda and an Acura, and we can generalize very well. Dogs are not as great at generalizing. They would have to learn in the Honda, in the Toyota, in the Acura. So the same thing, you have to teach that sit means sit in my house and sit in the yard and sit in the driveway. And so really being clear that you have taught what a cue means and that it means the same thing no matter where you are. Okay. So I'm going to try to keep track of the chat. And if I see a question pop up that I can answer that is about the content that I'm talking about right now, I will try to answer it. But otherwise, I'm going to be able to answer everything at the end. We should have plenty of time. So anything that's kind of miscellaneous or kind of about the topic, but not this specific slide, or that I can't answer at the moment, I'll answer at the end. Thank you for asking questions, everyone. All right, so I'm going to show you what it looks like when I do teach heel and add the cue to the behavior. So I'm going to teach it. I've been teaching it with a food lure. I cut out, this video used to be very long. I cut out about a minute of it. So now you're at the point where I'm attaching the cue to the behavior. So you have to ask yourself, well, what does heel position I'm working on here? What do I want heel to look like? I want the heel position to look like coming next to me and getting parallel to me and waiting at my knee. So I want to attach heel to the final behavior. So you're going to see that I say it heel right as she kind of scoots into position. And then I mark with a yes, and I give her the treat. I do it a few times. And I think I start to back it up just a little bit. I probably could have started backing it up sooner after attaching it a few times to the final behavior. So you can take a look. Okay, so you get the picture that I was basically using my hand to get her into position, saying heel right as she got into position, and then marking and reinforcing. And I would say it a little sooner each time. I did not want to say heel when she was getting into position because I want her to know heel is be next to me and right at my knee. A couple good questions in the chat. Somebody asked about they have a deaf dog and can use sign where most would use a word. Absolutely. That goes back to a cue can be anything. It can be a word. It can be a hand signal. Again, it can be like technically, this happens a lot with service dogs. Like the curb becomes an environmental cue to sit or to notify their person, their handler, or whatever, that a curb is here. But our dogs pick up on that a lot too. If you ask them to sit at sidewalks, that type of thing. Leashes can become a cue to run to the door. So anything can become a cue. It's just a matter of what you pair with the behavior. So that was a really great question. So human error number 2 is not rewarding enough. I used to say people being stingy with reinforcement and rewards, but I think being stingy implies like you're intentionally withholding. And I think that's not necessarily the case for most of you. I think people completely underestimate how frequently and the volume and the frequency that a behavior can and should be reinforced to maintain overall and to occur in certain circumstances. So to give you just a little bit of jargon, and stick with me here, there is a phrase called rate of reinforcement, which means basically how many times are you rewarding, we'll say per minute in this situation, but it's basically how frequently are you rewarding your dog. And rate of reinforcement can be one of the biggest factors that can impact if your dog tunes into you in a specific situation. Because the thing is, if you're out at a park Let's use an example. If you're out at a park, it's an off-leash park, your dog is social, so they're playing with their friends. And they come up to you a bunch and you just kind of say, "Hey, Fluffy, great, you're having fun." And then suddenly after 30 minutes, they're having a blast. You call them over to you. And that again is like they have the two options to weigh. And they're like, "Well, why would I come over to you? All the good stuff has happened away from you, not near you in this last 30 minutes." That's one example. Another example is, okay, we're training in a new environment and you're asking your dog to sit and stay and look at you and do all these different cues. And you just got there and it's, one cue after another, and they don't get any rewards. That is going to impact if they decide, okay, well, it's a lot of fun to engage with you. It works out for me to engage with you, or it is not worth it. And nothing good happens when I work for you. Nothing good happens when I respond correctly. So I'm going to tune out and go do what I would prefer to do, which is probably explore, try to greet dogs, do whatever your dog would be doing instead. A low rate of reinforcement can cause frustration for the dog. It can cause confusion. I don't know what you're asking me. You're not making it clear enough what I'm getting correct. And it can certainly, this is one of the biggest things, cause low enthusiasm and slow training progress. So when you increase your rate of reinforcement, you often see increased enthusiasm and your dog understanding. A lot of folks can get really put off by how frequently I ask them to reward. And the thing is, we're not doing that forever. It's not like you have to, for loose leash walking in a new environment, I'm asking you to reward every step for the rest of your life. But a lot of times when you are first teaching behaviors and then you are proofing them and asking for them around distracting environments, you have to maintain a high rate of reinforcement or your dog is, again, going to tune out and you're not going to have the success you want. So I'm going to show you a video example of loose leash walking and using a high rate of reinforcement. And again, trying to combat this fear of, oh no, well, I have to use a high rate of reinforcement forever. No, but if you use it initially, it can lead to really amazing results. So as you can see, and this is a condensed version of what high rate of reinforcement can lead to. It's way more obviously nuanced and many more steps than this. But I really urge you to see kind of long-term for your goals that a super high rate of reinforcement can keep your dog engaged, excited, caring about you, focused, wanting to participate versus a low rate of reinforcement, which might mean that our expectations are too high, or we simply don't realize that we should be reinforcing more, or we're not aware of behaviors that we could be reinforcing. That can really lead to our dogs checking out and saying, this is not worth it to me, or this is too confusing to me, or this is not fun for me, all of which would decrease their listening. One quick question. So there was a question. Okay. We've got a lot of questions about treats. And yes, I'm using a lot of treats in all of my examples. I'm going to talk about that kind of throughout this presentation, touching it on many different angles, but it's super important to remember that food is what we call a primary reinforcer. Dogs are designed to like food. If a dog is not eating or they are not interested in food, it is most likely that they are anxious, stressed, excited, overwhelmed, basically that they're emotional and there's other things at play than them just not liking food. And this is where I love to give you so much information in these webinars, but it is general. If you are having issues with your specific dog, you absolutely can and should work with a trainer, because those are things that a trainer would troubleshoot with you. It is very rare that we see a dog that is truly not quote unquote food motivated. There are usually other things at play. And it's really important to get to the bottom of that, because just like we talked about at the beginning, any type of stress or anxiety that your dog is feeling, if they're not eating food, there's likely other stuff going on, which we're actually going to talk about emotional states later. There was another question about food volume. So obviously you'll notice I do a ton of training, and I do not do it at the expense of any of the dogs that I work with, the expense of their health. I use teeny tiny pieces. It is quality over quantity. So I'm not feeding like a whole chunk of hot dog or anything like that. Think basically pea-sized treats. I have a Chihuahua at home. I do a ton of training with her with food. She is in great shape. She is not overweight at all. It's all about really being conscious of how big your pieces are. And then also, if you have heavy training days, being mindful about meal sizes, that type of thing. But I just want to be really clear that you can and should use food and training in a safe and healthy way for your dog. Okay. So make sure you're giving your dog lots of wins. So like I said here, use lots of small rewards throughout a training session. You can look for and reward as much good behavior as you can. So you don't necessarily only have to reward stuff that your dog does that you ask for. You can and should reward stuff that they do that you like, that they just did on their own. This is called capturing. I have a whole webinar about it. And it can be a really great training technique, and it can be a really great way to keep that rate of reinforcement high. So making sure you're giving more wins probably than you think you need. So I'm going to show you a video where I am trying to get this dog's attention. I'm going to use what's called capturing. You'll notice I do not ask for his attention at any point. I do not cue it. I don't say his name. At one point, you will see me reach down and touch him. He's a little nervous. So I'm just giving him some tactile comfort. And then going back to marking and rewarding behaviors that he's offering. So I want you to look at two things: how frequently I reward and what behavior you think I am capturing. Okay. So a lot going on in that video. I am using a clicker because I think when the environment is really distracting, a clicker can be a really nice, crystal clear way to say, yes, that's what I wanted. Here comes your food. So if you guessed that I was capturing the moment he turned his head, you're absolutely right. I am capturing attention. I don't need prolonged attention. I don't need him to look at me and sit. I just want him to turn his head in my direction. So a lot of great questions. And yes, I was using a clicker. I'm sorry, the setup that I have for volume is not great. So you guys probably couldn't hear the clicker. But yes, I was using a marker there. So I fed 12 times in 65 seconds. So I'll be really curious from you all. Did that feel like a lot or a little? From my training perspective, that was very fine. That was an okay rate of reinforcement. If I really wanted to get him more engaged, I would have reinforced more. If I can get even, depending on what I'm working on, I might, really just like click treat, because that can really, really, really boost engagement. So I think this was fine. If I drop below like 10 treats in a minute, or I would start to get a little like, okay, what can I change about the environment to increase the chances that I'm getting clickable behavior? Or I would decrease my criteria. So it is managing your criteria, saying, okay, the behavior I'm asking for, I'm not getting enough. And so my feeding and rewarding frequency is too low. So how can I maybe decrease my criteria, go further away from the scary thing? If we're working on a trigger, go to a quieter spot. So I would get more attention. A lot of this stuff you need to be starting at home anyway. This is behavior he clearly knew, but there was a lot going on. I think there were maybe kids in the distance, and he had a hard time disengaging, but I didn't ask him to look at me. I just simply captured. So lots of great. So Nicole is putting a lot of my previous webinars in the chat, because there are some great questions that I've addressed in other webinars, specifically small dogs, training with small dogs. And then I also did one about adolescents, because the thing is, and you all are noticing this, that I can give you information, but applying it to your own specific situation, it's not going to be a one size fits all. So you're going to have questions. And the good news is we have some other information that might help give you a bigger picture, some answers to your questions. Okay, so human error number 3, talking too much. All right, this is another one I really want to clarify. I love when you talk to your dog. I think connecting with your dog and having conversations with them and talking at them, I talk to my dog all day long. But where you run into trouble is when you overuse your voice and your words with your dog in an effort to get them to respond. It can turn into nagging. Think Charlie Brown's teacher, want, want. Dogs, unfortunately, can really quickly learn to tune us out. Our voice simply becomes irrelevant to them because they hear it all the time, and they can't necessarily differentiate between when we're just talking at them, like I said, like I do with my dog all day long, and when we're actually giving information about what we need from them. So be really, really mindful about how and when and what it looks like when you're talking to your dog, or more specifically, when you're trying to get their attention or get them to do something. So this is a video of me nagging, and it don't worry if this looks like you trying to get your dog's attention. It's very common, but you'll see, like, obviously it's not effective.
Red. Hey, red. Red. Hey, red. Hey, red. Hey, red.
So hopefully you could hear that. I was saying the dog's name Red over and over again, and he could not have cared less. He was busy in the grass. My communication was clearly not working. It was not effective. And I was not only wasting my breath, I was teaching Red to ignore me when I do need his attention. So be really intentional with your communication. Make sure your words are relevant when you say them. Use clear cues that you've taught your dog. So we've already talked about how to teach clear cues, making sure your cues are clear when you say them, the way you use them, and making sure you're following those cues with very clear consequences and positive consequences, of course. And this is where the difference between saying your dog's name because you're just talking to them and saying your dog's name with an intention of getting them to look at you. And you would want to ask yourself, have I actually taught them that when I say their name, I want them to look at me? Or is it a little less clear than that because I'm saying their name all day long and I just happen to think that they'll look at me the times that I need them to? It's a really important question to ask yourself. And when it comes to hand signals, are your hand signals clear? Are they consistent? Are they consistent among everyone who uses them? Are you doing them in a way that is distracting? Is it, are they nice and quiet and clear? I keep saying this word clear, which I feel like, again, I'm wanting to define. What does clear mean? I would say clear means easily perceived and easily understood by your dog. So making sure your cues are both of those things, easily perceived and easily understood by your dogs. So here's a video of I'm giving meaningful verbal communication. So I'm saying this dog's name, Milo. I am following it up with a positive consequence, a good boy and a treat. And I'm saying I'm not giving other communication in the meantime. I'm simply saying his name in a very direct, positive tone so he knows to look at me. And most importantly, I have previously taught him that when he hears his name, he should look at me.
Yeah, good job.
I'm not marking here. I'm just saying good boy. I'm waiting for him to get a little distracted. And he gives me what we call a really nice head whip. He looks back at me immediately. So I, of course, reward that. And this is just where you really have to sit back and look at the instances where you say your dog's name, or you say come, or you say let's go, or whatever cue you're saying in those moments. How often do you say that? How often do you pack it up with consequences they care about? Have you taught them exactly what it means? You know, if I'm walking along the trail and I say, all right, Milo, let's go, buddy. We're going to, keep walking, just kind of in conversation, which again is great. Then I can't necessarily expect him when I say Milo later to know to look at me, because one situation is very passive and is not necessarily me needing his attention, and then later it is on my end, and that feels confusing to him. So be really intentional about trying to get your dog's attention. And if we're going to talk about kind of what happens if they don't respond or what you can do, but in general, if your dog is not responding to you, this feels really counterintuitive. If your dog is not responding to you, do not keep repeating yourself. I guess maybe that's not counterintuitive, but somebody mentioned in the chat that it's like when kids are not listening, continuing to talk at them is not exactly effective, right? So make sure that you pause for a second, you evaluate the situation and say, okay, should I keep going here? Or is there something else I can do? So human error number 4, this kind of goes into the previous slide, is repeating cues. Now, this is really common, and don't beat yourself up if you repeat cues. It's just something to be mindful of, but it's very common for folks to just start talking and say, they're maybe giving information to their dog and just continuing to say it without giving the dog a chance to think. Sit, 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 Fluffy, sit, 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 sit. Meanwhile, often paired with a hand waving all around, maybe the person is moving. Talk about not exactly clear, but not only is it not clear to the dog, you could be also teaching them to ignore you or only respond after they hear sit 4 times. It could just become the cue to hear it 4 times. So what you're going to do instead, I'll talk about in a second, but in general, really, really try to avoid continuously repeating yourself and not giving your dog a chance to think. Oops. So this is an example of I'm repeating a cue. I'm going to use the cue hold. And this is where Red is supposed to touch his nose to my hand and hold it there. And you'll notice he doesn't do it right away. So I re-cue. And humans have this desire to repeat, not repeat cues, to help our dogs. We want to say, no, do it, do this, this is what I mean, do this. But what happens is that causes a lot of chatter and doesn't allow them to think. So what we think might be helping is actually just confusing them. You can go ahead and watch here.
Hold, Red, Red, come on, hold, Red, hold, let's go, Red, hold, Red, Red, hold. Okay,
so now you all can see Red looking at me like, what the heck do you mean, right? Why do you keep repeating yourself? Why is your hand moving around? Why are you Why do you keep saying these words over and over again? I don't know what you mean. So instead, say your cue once and give your dog time to think about it. Because sometimes it takes them a second to go, okay, I heard what they said. I heard them say sit. I know that typically sit means I should put my butt on the ground and I get a little treat. Even though there's a car whizzing by, I think I'm going to be able to do it again. Yep, let me try sit. Great, got the right answer. So give them a second and let them think before you repeat yourself. If your dog does not respond, ask yourself, do they know what I'm asking? Do they know this cue? Are they in an environment where they can think? We're going to talk about emotional states later. How can I help my dog be successful? So instead of continuing to repeat yourself, pause and say, what is going on here? So if your dog does not respond, you've got a few options. And by few, I guess I mean a couple. So one is wait 15 to 30 seconds and then cue again. A lot of times, not a lot of times, it can be the case that our dogs do not hear us or they really truly were distracted. If you need to repeat yourself, it's not the end of the world. And repeat yourself after you've let them think through it. A lot of my clients get really nervous if I'm like, okay, cue again, and they're like, oh, but I can't repeat cues. There's a big difference between saying sit, 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 and saying sit once, seeing their response or lack of response, of taking an evaluation and trying again. You also have the option to ask for a different, easier behavior to get some momentum, get some wins in, get their brain back, and then recue the behavior that you saw before or that you were asking for before. But the fact of the matter is that you really need to you have to ask yourself, like, do they know what I'm asking in this scenario? And do they, have I done my due diligence in teaching it here? And I really hope to convey in this talk that our dogs, if we train in a way that our dogs enjoy, and we do our job of teaching them exactly what we want and proofing around distractions, our dogs will do what we want most of the time. Dogs are certainly not spiteful. They are not intentionally disobeying. Dogs do what works for them. Dogs are dogs. And if we see a response we don't like, I really urge you to evaluate it on your end, evaluate what's going on, really think about the big picture instead of, unfortunately, we have a society, we're a very punishment-based society. We have this culture of have to tell them that they were wrong, or we have to hold them accountable, which is like, so talk about a human construct. The only being that I need to hold accountable in my training is me, and making sure that I have done everything I can to help my dog be successful. So really, really think about that before you reach to assumptions that your dog is just intentionally being bad, being disobedient, that type of thing. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a nice clean cue for hold, and you'll notice he doesn't do it right away, but I give him a second.
Hold. Yes.
So for those of you, even because you don't necessarily know my hold cue, hold is hold my hand out, put your nose up against my hand. The first video, you probably were like, what is she even asking? What does she even want him to do? But this second video, it was nice, clear with my cueing. I was very like, this is it. Here it is. I'm presenting it in a way you can perceive and understand. And you might need to figure it out for a second, but behavior that I was looking for. He's also wearing a GPS soul collar on his collar, in case you were wondering. Okay, so the next human error, and this is where a lot of you are here to, this was, distractions was in the description of this talk. And hopefully you've noticed we've talked about distractions on and off this whole time, but working too quickly around too many distractions is one of the number one reasons why training falls apart, because we expect too much of our dogs too quickly. And we do not take into account how distracting the world can be, even when we don't think it is. So the thing is, distractions, as you know, because again, you're here, distractions make it really hard for your dog to respond. They could be excited. They, meaning your dog, because of the distractions, they could be excited. They could be frustrated. I see dogs over there. I want to go say hi to them. I'm frustrated. They could be anxious. Oh my gosh, we're at this farmer's market. There's so many people and dogs here. This is overwhelming. They could be scared. Oh, I'm really afraid of dogs and they're walking right down towards me on the sidewalk. This is really scary for me. Or I'm scared of strangers and there's a lot of them around me. This is really scary. Training too quickly around too many distractions is going to decrease your dog's responsiveness because they simply cannot handle how to cope with the distractions. So the thing is that here are common distractions. I mean, everything is a distraction. And when you look at a page like this, you're like, how does anyone ever walk down the street with a dog? There's just distractions at every corner. And what can be really helpful to wrap your head around is that training your dog at home where there are no distractions is like learning addition, subtraction, the relatively basic stuff that when you're first learning can still be hard. And when you're out expecting your dog to respond to cues around distractions, it is like algebra. It's like trigonometry. It's like geometry. It is like all the tough, advanced stuff that uses the basics. It uses addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, but it is applied in a way that it is hard and it takes a lot to learn and to master. There was a comment, living in a big city is really hard with distractions. Absolutely. It is really, really hard. So if nothing, okay, of course, I hope you come away with tips today. And I think no matter what distractions you're dealing with, all the stuff today can help. High rate of reinforcement, being clear with your cues, making sure that your dog understands what you're asking. All of these things are going to help. But if there's one thing you come away with, it's that distractions are hard. And of course, our dogs are going to respond worse. And they're not trying to be bad. They're not being stubborn. They are just distracted. So it's like going to the concert with your favorite band of all time. And you're sitting front row and somebody has a piece of paper in front of you and says, do these multiplication problems right now. Ignore the band on the stage. Ignore your favorite song that's playing. Give me these multiplication tables right now. You might be able to do it with some practice. You might, as humans, it's a little different, but it would be hard and it would be really, really, you'd have a lot of competing motivators there. So when it comes to training around distractions, you want to think about systematically adding distractions in a way that your dog can be successful. So we often think that distractions only live kind of outside or in downtown areas or at the park or something like that. But there are places that are more distracting, but are not too distracting. So you want to always teach behaviors at home. And then an example of a training plan would be then go practice them in your driveway, then practice them in your neighborhood around your basic walking route, and then go in a shopping center, but maybe start at an off hour where there aren't a lot of people there. Make small jumps with distraction instead of going straight from your home to the shopping center. Do you see how you're missing pieces there? I live in an apartment. An example of places that I've practiced around distractions are in my hallway, in the stairwell, right outside the door, in our little neighborhood dog park when there's nobody there. There are ways to add distractions. And when you start looking for those ways in a parking lot that's outside, but there's not a lot going on, it's about, there are plenty of places to practice that don't go 0 to 100. You can break it down along the way. So there was a really good point in the chat that a dog is food motivated at home, quote unquote food motivated, will eat at home, but won't eat when out around distractions. And this is where systematically adding distractions can be really, really important. And also when it comes to working around distractions, never underestimate the power of training at home. So you're thinking, well, no, my issue isn't at home. My issue is out around distractions. Well, your dog is going to be more likely to respond to cues around distractions if those behaviors you're asking of them are really strong and really reliable. And you can do a lot of that work in non-distracting environments. If you practice sit at home 10 times every day for 2 weeks, and then you go try sit outside, you have 2 weeks worth of sitting reinforced to then try outside, versus you teach it one day, you never practice it again, and then you go practice it outside. You do not have a lot of reinforcement history being out for the behavior of sit. That's just a simple example. Excuse me. If we teach cues at home, is it still okay to do your walks as normal? So I'm not sure necessarily what you're asking in this question. I think, yes, continue to walk your dog and continue to do your training at home. It does not have to be one or the other, unless you're seeing, I guess, a lot of undesirable behavior on walks. But again, that kind of is like, you'd have to work a little bit more with a trainer to see what's at play there. But yeah, I would expect none of this stuff. You're never going to have training perfection. Well, what is perfect anyway? But if we all waited for our dogs to be extremely well trained before kind of leaving out in the world, then we would never necessarily get out there and get that practice done. But if we go out with the mindset of, okay, this is going to be really hard, I'm going to help set them up for success, I'm going to be looking for smallest success points, I'm going to be marking a lot of desirable behavior, and you are outings are going to be much more pleasant, versus like, I'm expecting the behavior outside of the house that I get at home. You're going to be really disappointed. Then exactly like I said, if you have more distractions, expect less from your dog. Now, I'm not saying everyone should be okay with just their dog running amok and quote unquote an untrained dog. That's not what I'm trying to convey. What I'm trying to convey is that be very intentional about managing your criteria and your expectations for your dog. Instead of asking them to face you and sit and look up at you and hold the look for 3 seconds, from a trainer standpoint, I'm like, that's like 6 behaviors. Turn away from the distraction, sit, look up at me, and look up at me with duration. That's a lot. Hey, can you at least turn your body away from a distraction? Great. I will reward you for that. Because when you reward the little stuff, those little changes, those little desirable behaviors, you're going to see more of it. Gets you closer to your goal quicker. There's a comment, if walks are too hard, walk at hours when there's less traffic. Of course, dog traffic. I have a whole webinar about what we call management, which I do talk about later, where we basically control the environment. We change the environment to increase the chances we get better behavior from our dog. The nice thing about that is it's super easy and does not involve a lot of training. So definitely check out the management webinar. So this is an example of why group classes can be awesome. It can be a really nice systematic way to introduce distractions in, again, a controlled setting. This is Woof's dog training in Arlington, Virginia. I love Woof's. This is sadly many years ago, pre-pandemic. You see no masks. It's even crazy to look at. And so this is River. He's an adolescent German short-haired pointer. And this is his dad, and they are going to practice a recall. So if you look at the middle of the screen, on the floor, there's a peanut butter jar, there's toys, there's, I think all the treat jars are open. So there are crazy distractions here, and they are going to practice a recall, and you can see how it goes. The trainer said, this is advanced. So he's getting River all warmed up, telling River to stay. And you hear all the cheering. So River thought about going to the distractions, but ultimately Dad won, which you could hear me cheering, was so fun to watch. that victory there was not based on that single repetition. That was based on all of the training they had done before that. It is not a matter of, well, how in this exact moment do I get my dog to come past distractions? It is, how do I build a training relationship and a relationship in general with my dog that they know coming to me is one of the best things that they could choose. And again, this is certainly not a how-to. It was just a fun example of why group classes can be so beneficial for working around distractions and building skills. So Kat had a fantastic question that I think we're going to cover later. Sometimes when we're training our pup, he knows when we're going to ask for something and he jumps the gun. Should we reward that just the same? So what I'm guessing, Kat, is that you're asking, should you reward a behavior your dog offers that you don't ask for? And the answer is 100%. So we are going to talk about that later. If I'm lucky, it's coming up right now, I think. Yeah. I think this is where I talk about it most. So one of the worst things we can do is ignore desirable behavior, because the thing about positive reinforcement, again, this is the science. This is just the science at work. I'm just the messenger. When you add positive reinforcement to something, you are increasing the chances that you see that behavior again in the future, which means if you do not add positive reinforcement, and I'm not talking about punishment or adding any, pretty much, I'm talking about not adding consequences at all. Definitely not positive ones. You are not increasing the chances that that behavior happens more frequently. So you run the risk of that behavior going away because it wasn't reinforced. Dogs are always learning. Positive reinforcement should happen outside of training sessions. In fact, I would argue the way that your dog perceives your relationship and the world outside of training sessions is almost just as important, if not more, than during training sessions. Because a training session might be, if you're at home, maybe 10 minutes a day out of 24 hours, like that's nothing. Or if you're doing a class or something, maybe an hour a day, once a week, that's nothing. There are so many opportunities to reward good. I don't like saying good because behavior is just behavior. It is not good or bad. To reward desirable behavior throughout the day. And ignoring it or saying, oh, I didn't ask for it, so I'm not going to reward it. Or, well, we're not training anymore, so I'm not going to reward it. You run the risk of your dog learning, okay, well, then maybe I shouldn't be doing this behavior. So seek out and reward desirable behaviors. Have a yes mindset. Look for opportunities to reward your dog throughout the day. It does not always have to be with treats, though, depending on how challenging the behavior is, it can be really beneficial to keep treat jars around your house. And you would want to use low value treats there because it's an easier environment, but you can reinforce with play or attention, all sorts of stuff. But what's most important is that we teach our dog there's always a chance that something good is going to happen if you make a desirable choice. And this is what we call capturing, meaning your dog kind of happens to do it or they offer it without being asked. And you catch that and you say, yeah, I like that. I really want you to do more of that. An example of this is like with puppies or young dogs. The puppy goes and they lie down on the couch. They finally settle down. They're resting. And all the humans are like, oh my gosh, finally, the dog is being quiet. Don't bother them. And the dog learns like, well, when I go hang out by myself, life is really boring. That's not very fun for me. Like nothing good happens. Versus when I go I steal something out of mom's purse, then she chases me all around the house and it's so fun. And so if your dog is kind of looking for attention or wanting something to do, and the quote unquote naughty thing is what produces their desirable reinforcement, and all their quote unquote good or desirable behavior has gone ignored, what do you think they're going to choose? Something to keep in mind. Okay, I'm going to take the slide off because I don't want you guys to think about the caption. So I'm going to show you a video. The goal of this video, now I have a ton of videos on my Instagram, on the business Instagram page, JW Dog Training. The point of this video was for the question, well, when can I stop using treats? And the idea behind this video is that behaviors always have to be reinforced. It might not always be with food, but it has to be reinforced in some way. But what I want you all to take away from this is the concept of catching your dog doing a desirable behavior and reinforcing that in some way. I'll go ahead and talk over the video. So I'll read the captions for you. The behavior that we're catching here is this dog lying calmly on the couch. Now, he's a young adolescent dog, and there's a lot of other behaviors he could be doing when he wants attention or when he's bored. He could be jumping, he could be counter surfing, he could be, chewing on stuff. So when he's lying calmly on the couch, of course, hey, thanks, buddy. What a great choice. Let me make sure I make that work out for you. So you'll see the couple different ways that you could reinforce this nice, calm behavior of lying on the couch. So the caption says, when can I stop using treats? Rewarding good behavior is important for keeping the behavior strong and dependable. It doesn't always have to be with food, but it does need to be something your dog finds enjoyable. So in this example, mom gives the dog a treat for lying calmly on the couch. In this example, she offers enjoyable affection. In this example, she initiates play. In this example, she says, hey, that was so nice of you to lie calmly. Let's go for a walk. There are so many ways to reward your dog. It doesn't need to stop. Now, what that caption at the end should have said is it cannot stop, but I like to soften up the language a little bit. So the goal, and the thing about my internet videos is they're called Reels. If you're on Instagram, you understand. And they used to only give you 30 seconds, which is why the text goes by really fast. So they're very super quick clips. They've now gone up to a gracious 60 seconds. So the goal with this video that I think was helpful for you is there are a number of ways that you can acknowledge desirable behavior from your dogs. And you'll notice I said enjoyable affection because our perception of praise and affection is not always, or attention is not always necessarily what our dog likes. So be really aware of what your dog enjoys. And if you go to pet your dog and they get up and walk away, make sure you know they probably didn't enjoy that. Okay. Oh, thank you, Nicole, for sharing my Instagram page in the caption in the chat. Okay. So this one is super important. Error number 7, using too much punishment. So I've mentioned a few times, we live in a society that not only has normalized punishment, we often glorify it, which is really, really sad. And so you can be really quick, understandably, to think that you need to punish quote unquote bad behavior. You need to let your dog know when they've done something wrong. Unfortunately, there's a lot of really well documented through studies, through data, side effects that punishment comes with negative fallout. What that means is that there can be a lot of negative side effects when we implement punishment, let alone too much punishment. You'll notice in all of my videos, I have not used punishment or shown punishment because it's not something that I use as part of my training. Because the thing is, it can really break down your relationship with your dog. Punishment can cause dogs to become fearful, reactive towards you, towards other stimuli. It can cause avoidance behaviors. This is where we see a lot of the fallout with punishment is your dog starts avoiding you, maybe not all the time, but in specific circumstances that have predicted the punishment. And it's so to us, it is not worth it at all. So not only do you not need it, we would never risk the fallout, the risks that can come with using punishment with our dogs. The thing about punishment too, is it simply does not give your dog information about what you do want them to do. You might, and by punishment, I mean, so the scientific definition is anything that decreases a behavior. So that could look like yelling at your dog, giving a stern no, a leash correction, using a shock collar, using a prong collar, hitting your dog, which obviously I certainly don't condone. But I get it. A lot of times, due to our existing beliefs that we've been kind of conditioned from society to think that we have to punish in these quote unquote bad scenarios, bad behaviors, our dogs need to know what they did wrong. But the good news is that dogs are not moral. They do not know right from wrong. They know things that lead to safe consequences and unsafe consequences, so they know what to avoid. But again, that avoidance can cause much bigger issues and break our relationship down, which is, of course, not what we want. So we recommend skipping the punishment, going to the behavior of what we want, giving information about what we want instead. And again, it can just really break down your relationship. It can cause a dog who doesn't enjoy being around you. They're scared to approach you. You could be inadvertently punishing them for coming up to you. Like a lot of times folks feel like they have to punish their dog if they ran away. And then, oops, they're accidentally just punishing their dog for finally coming back. So punishment is not worth it. And it is not necessary for really good, high quality, highly effective training. It's not necessary. So what do you do instead? You have a behavior you don't like. Your dog did something you don't like. What do? Well, we recommend changing your mindset. When it comes to something you don't like that your dog does, what can you replace that behavior with that you like instead? So the mindset would be, do this instead of that. An important piece to this is teaching your dog that great consequences happen when they focus on you. They're not going to get scolded. They're not going to get punished. And I promise you, if you are scolding or punishing your dog and you think that that doesn't impact their desire to be near you and listen to you in certain circumstances, I can absolutely assure you that it is. And that it is there's a huge difference for a dog who knows nothing bad will happen if they approach their owner and a dog who is not sure. One will enthusiastically fly towards the owner. Hey, what do you need, mom? The other one is, ooh, I don't know. Is mom looking safe right now? Is my pet parent looking safe right now? I don't know. And and of course, relationship wise, it's not worth it. But for training results, I'm telling you, you're going to see huge improvements in your dog responding if you pair positive consequences with the stuff you want them to do. So use management to prevent those undesirable behaviors and then use positive reinforcement to your advantage. Like I said, there's a science to it. It is always at play. You will see more of the behaviors that you reinforce. Use it to your advantage. So this is an example of addressing an unwanted behavior without punishment. I'm going to go ahead and read the captions again because it does go by pretty quickly. Is there something your dog does that you don't like? Teach a different behavior to replace that unwanted one. Puppy Lennox here likes to bark at mom when they're in the kitchen together. So we are teaching Lennox to lie calmly in her bed instead of barking. Look at Lennox staying in her bed while mom adds all sorts of distractions. When it comes to unwanted behavior, be sure to make it clear to your dog what they should do instead and reward the heck out of that replacement behavior. Your dog will start to make better choices and everyone will be happier. So again, I don't like when you do this, so let me have you do this instead. Yes, it doesn't come with the same risks and it can lead to quicker, faster, stronger results. And like we've talked about this whole time, a better relationship. So human error number 8, sloppy mechanics. Okay. Mechanics are the basically like the human side of training. So your timing, your cueing, your treat delivery, that's what we mean by mechanics. And I hate the word sloppy, but I wasn't quite sure what else to use here because it basically is, it's when our mechanics are not clean, when they are not clear, it can lead to our dogs being confused. So a huge error that humans make is holding the food up when we cue a behavior. Now, I completely understand why we do this. 1, convenience. We want to be able to get the treat to them quickly. We want to have the treat ready. 2, you might use food to get the behavior. That's called a lure, like a sit over the treat over the nose for sit or down to the ground for down. So you might use a lure to get the behavior, but you don't get rid of the lure quick enough. So it becomes, you just hold it up. And this causes the argument that a lot of people have that my dog will only respond when I have food. And what has happened is that the food is simply part of the cue, meaning we've talked all about cues today. Your dog thinks that sit only means sit when you are holding the treat up. And if you are not holding the treat up, the picture looks different and they do not know necessarily what you are asking. And so if we clean up these mechanics a little bit, you can easily fix that issue of your dog only responding when you have food. Because again, I use a ton of food in training, and I certainly don't want a dog who will only respond when they see food. Of course not. And that can be solved with some mechanics. So this is okay. And it's also where people will say, oh, using food is bribery. Well, in some cases, yes, if Fluffy doesn't respond and then you pull the food out and then Fluffy responds, again, I would argue that's more the cue is food is part of the cue, or they've learned they only get the good consequence if they see it beforehand. And every time that you don't have food in your hand, they don't get anything good. So this is an example of what a lot of people do is hold the food up and give your cue. So that's a food in my right hand. And then the dog does the few behaviors and I give her the treat. So what you want to do instead is use food as a reward after the behavior happens, not as a bribe to get your dog to respond. So food comes after the behavior is completed. This is so important to, again, deal with that issue of, well, my dog only responds when he sees the food. So think about keeping your hands empty, cue the behavior, and then reach for your food. Again, I just did a video of training mechanics for Instagram, and you can see the difference between when you're holding your hand in the treat pouch. That's kind of the same example of holding the food out. And when you don't, when your hands are clean, open, empty, when you give the cue. Think about keeping your hand at neutral during training. Dogs learn really quickly that either the food out ahead of time predicts the food after, and no food out means that they don't get any food, which again, dogs do what works for them. We like to think that they will just perform or work or respond just because they're loyal. We said so, that type of stuff. But that's not the case. They are living beings who do things that work for them. And so they learn, when I see the food, I get the food. When I don't see the food, nothing good happens after I respond correctly. So make sure your dog learns that whether they see the food or not, they get rewarded afterwards. So this is an example. I have my hands empty. Look, no treats in my hand. I'm cueing all my behaviors. And then I say yes when she does it. And then I reach for my treat pouch. So my hands are empty and I reach for my treats after she does what I want. Okay. Number 9, we're getting to the finish line. You guys have been so patient. We're almost done. Ignoring your dog's emotional state. This is one of the biggest reasons why dogs cannot respond correctly around distractions. And you'll notice I've brought this up many times throughout this presentation because it's so important and it touches everything. It touches how you add distractions, when you add distractions, when you give cues. Your dog's emotional state directly impacts their ability to respond correctly. When our dogs are experiencing strong emotions, that can inhibit learning. The amygdala is taking over and we call it their reptilian brain kicks in. Their thinking brain, not usually accessible. This could be because they're excited. It could be because they're panicked. It could be because they're frustrated. They're scared. And around us, distractions create pretty much all of these emotions. So it depends on the situation, on your dog. But in general, we call this over threshold, meaning our dog is not in a space to think or to learn. And asking your dog to respond correctly in these moments can be setting them up for failure, meaning can be basically setting them up to not respond correctly. I had a client, understandably, ask me the other day, their dog has really bad stranger danger, meaning strangers who come over to the house are really hard for the dog. And a stranger came in, the dog had a big reaction. And this client said, I need a cue that in the moment she will respond to no matter what. And I responded to that saying, if a intruder was coming into your house in the middle of the night, and they had a weapon and you felt your safety and your life felt threatened, there's unlikely to be something that I could get that in that moment with that level of threat that I could say to get you to snap out of it or respond correctly. Because unfortunately, when our dogs are panicked or they're having a big emotional response to something, we can't say to them, there's nothing for you to worry about. In their mind, especially if they're in fight or flight mode, there is something to be worried about. Same thing with being at the concert. If you want to look at more quote unquote positive emotions, oh my gosh, my favorite Taylor Swift just walked out onto the stage. Hopefully that resonates with some of you. Taylor Swift just walked out. She's looking right at me. I am so excited. This is the best day of my life. Somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, excuse me, can you do 167 divided by 13? Definitely cannot. No, absolutely I cannot. So we really have to pay very close attention to how our dogs are feeling, because that's going to impact their ability to respond. So let's look at some pictures and think about emotional states. Okay. So relaxed and focused. This dog is clearly, she's gazing up at me. So I see her body facing me, or her head and her eyes. She's got a nice, open, relaxed facial expression. Her eyes are soft. She's ready to receive information from me. This is a good emotional state, a good place for learning. So here she's pulling away from me. She's not vocalizing. She's not barking. She's not up on her hind legs. She's not lunging, but she's not facing me. And I can see her ears are forward. She's straining against the leash. So that tells me she's definitely distracted. And the chances I get her attention here depend on the dog and depend on the training history. Over threshold, see ya. So I think in this case, she was chasing wildlife or something, but I went from maybe being able to get her attention at the yellow to definitely not being able to get her attention at the red. She's gone. She's out of there. She's hoping to get that squirrel for lunch. And or whatever her motivation is for chasing squirrels, there's no getting her back at that point. So trying to give her a cue in that moment would not be successful. At that point, I would just need to get her away from that trigger, from that wildlife, get her some distance, try some calming activities. That's more for like a reactivity webinar, but I would absolutely need to change the environment in some way before expecting her to calm down. So what can you do? Learn and observe body language. So stay tuned into your dog's body language. Only give cues when your dog is likely to be successful. So that might feel counterintuitive. Wait, you don't want me to give my dog cues when they're distracted? No, I actually don't, because as we've talked about for the last hour and a half, it's the best way to get them to learn to ignore you. So you want to wait for them to be showing relaxed attention, just like this sweet Kai here. This is JW trainer Kaylee with her puppy, who is no longer a puppy anymore. But you can very clearly see he's looking up at her. He's making eye contact. His ears are forward. He is ready to receive information. This is a great training place. Learning canine body language is imperative. So this is not a body language webinar, but all of these dogs are showing very clear emotions. And if you can't see, or if you don't feel like you notice the emotions that each dog here is showing, that can be a really good indicator that you probably need to do a little bit more learning about canine body language. This guy up here on the top left with the patch over his eye, his ears are forward. He's straining against the leash. He's got a very direct eye contact. He's clearly very interested in something. Not sure, obviously, a picture is just a moment in time, but he looks extremely distracted. This sweet dog down on the bottom left, this gray and white pitty type thing. Her ears are flat back. She's showing whale eye. Her mouth is pushed forward. She's barking. Screams fear to me. This dog in the middle, jumping on the person, we could label that probably as excited. This sweet pitty girl on the top right, she has her ears back. She has her mouth shut. Her body is very stiff. Her tail is low. She also seems nervous to me. The Shiba in the bottom right is very clearly snarling. This is a nice, obvious one. Not a dog you would want to approach, and a dog who's clearly feeling an extreme emotion, not a time that you could give a cue. So again, if any of these are feeling confusing or you're unsure about these, I highly recommend to start with this book. Doggy Language by Lily Chin. Lily is an incredible artist, and she does an amazing job breaking down canine body language that you wouldn't necessarily expect, or it's just a great resource all in one place. Doggy Language by Lily Chin. And Deborah put another body language chart in the, oh, thank you. Nicole put, oh, you guys are great. Everybody's putting the doggy language book in the chat. Really quickly, displacement behaviors and stress signals are going to be the more subtle signs that our dogs are experiencing a heightened emotion. So sniffing can be a displacement behavior. Scratching can be a displacement behavior. You'd be surprised if your dog starts to randomly do these things during a training session, it could indicate that they are stressed. These bottom two here, the lip lick, the whale eye over on the left, you see the whites of his eyes. On the right, you see the yawning. These are also stress signals. Now, again, you have to look at the individual dog. You have to look at the big picture. I highly recommend doing more research on canine body language because that's going to give you a really good information about how your dog is feeling. And again, these dogs are stressed. Now, how much a dog these are more kind of what we would consider, I don't want to say mild because I don't want to write it off, but obviously it wasn't as intense as some of the dogs in the previous slide. So this is where you would put them in kind of the yellow category. And whether or not a dog responds totally depends on the dog and the training history. So last thing is using boring rewards, which I mostly talk about as food, but doesn't always have to be food. So rewards must compete with the distractions. Meaning, if you have a high-level distraction and you do not have a high-level reward, you are unlikely to get the behavior you're looking for. Petting and praise are unlikely to cut it. And that is just the facts that when it comes to challenging scenarios and wanting to build desirable behaviors, it is unlikely that a dog enjoys petting or verbal praise enough to increase those desirable behaviors. Maybe at home, maybe when things are calm and they're feeling cuddly, but when they're out in the world and they are working or distracted or a little overwhelmed, they usually need something a little bit better than petting and praise. That's not to say that play won't be effective, or that some type of tactile interaction, getting down on their level and interacting with them won't be effective, but simply saying good dog, or giving a little pat on the head will be enough for a big grand gesture, like ignoring another dog or something, then you're unlikely to make progress as quickly as you're hoping. So let's really quickly go through some reward options. So this is a hard and crunchy milk bone. I used to write these off as super low value, but my own dog, who is extremely picky, has decided she loves milk bones from the front desk of our building. The learner gets to decide what is reinforcing. That being said, I know a milk bone would not work if we were out on a hike somewhere and we came across another dog. Just in the context of the front desk, she finds them very valuable. I would put this at like $3. Like, they're not super high value, but for some dogs, they're better than nothing. And you would use this at home where life is boring and not a lot of distractions. Then you go to training treats. So these are soft, squishy treats, not Zooks necessarily, but just kind of anything that has a moderate smell level, and they're squishy and they're small, but Zooks are actually more bland than a lot of the good training treats that I like. And so they're better than milk bones, but they're not great. So I'd put them at about $15. And you would typically use these medium value treats in like the neighborhood or somewhere that's familiar to your dog and not so distracting, but more distracting at home. And then we get to the good stuff, meats, hot dogs, stuff like that. I would put that closer to like $50. And you would want to save that for when you've got guests over or when you're around other dogs or stuff like that, where it's much harder and you need to really up the ante to encourage your dog to pay attention to you. The dog that I was working with today for my client he gets really excited around other dogs on walks. So on walks, we used more medium value squishy training treat. And then around dogs, because walks were still distracting, but then only around dogs, we brought out some cheese and something extra tasty. So we didn't use cheese on the whole walk, because then just, rewarding check-ins and rewarding responding to his name, he got the cheese. And then if dogs showed up, the cheese would not maintain its value anymore. Okay. I also have, I am so sorry. I do not mean to be like salesy with my Instagram, but I put so much information there. I have a post on our JW Instagram that said, let's talk about treats. And I go through my recommendations. I put like 2 to 4 recommendations for low value and low, medium, and high value treats. And so that can be really helpful. And I think the comment sections of my posts are also really helpful, and they can, you've got a lot of good ideas there for other treat values. In general, you want to go for tasty, squishy treats. So think soft, stinky, and squishy. You need to have rewards that compete with distractions. I recommend a rotation because yes, dogs will get tired of the same old treat. So having 3 or 4 that you can rotate through. And then also think about other things your dog loves. Can you possibly use those in certain just environments to reward behavior you like? Some dogs who are crazy about tug, if you call them over in an off-leash space or across the park and you initiate a tug game, they'll think that's the best. That can't compete with any treat that you could give them. Maybe like you're out on the hike and they've done a great job of checking in with you. And so you're like, yeah, let's play with this stick. One thing to remember is that we do want reinforcers to be as close to the event as possible. That's why we use the marker word, like a yes or a clicker. And so just generally giving your dog like sticks at the end of a walk, they will not realize that their good behavior on the walk is what earned them the stick. You'd want to try to catch the exact moment that they did something you like. I use access to other dogs a lot of times, like a dog looks back at their human and I say, okay, go say hi, release them to go play. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this. And again, these are general ideas. You would want to work through it more with a trainer with your own specific dog. Okay, so let's recap. Your dog isn't listening because your dog is stubborn. Nope. Your dog is rude. Nope. Your dog is a brat. Nope. Your dog is dumb. Nope. Your dog isn't listening because your dog is distracted. Indeed. Your dog might be confused. Indeed. And your dog might be under-practiced. Indeed. This is so important. Take the labels out of it. Take the assumptions out of it and look at the behavior, look at the circumstances, and look at the training history, because that can really clear up what is actually going on. So your takeaways, decide what your goals are when it comes to your dog listening. Define what that means to you. Go through the cues that you want your dog to know and go through the distractions you need to practice that around. Figure out where your training is breaking down and think about where you might be accidentally causing slow progress. Again, I certainly don't like owner shaming. I simply want to make it very clear that our training is only as good as it is kind of on our end and with our delivery and our communication. Brainstorm how to set your dog up for success. Keep training fun and easy, and you'll see the best results possible. So try not to put too much pressure on it. Don't use punishment. Make it fun, make it easy, help your dog be successful, and you'd be surprised how quickly you can reach your goals. Okay, so I'm going to jump into questions. I'm going to leave this slide up for a second, my contact information and my website. I'm going to leave this up for a minute, and then I'll go ahead and answer questions off with this slide off, I'm going to stop sharing my screen probably. I'm going to jump into some questions. I'm going to see. I'm going to see if I can start answering anything. Okay. So somebody asked, related to a few slides back, what about when we try and redirect our dog from doing something we don't want and he offers a good behavior, gets rewarded, and then returns the undesirable behavior? So this is a really good question. So like a place we see this a lot is like a dog is barking out the window and you maybe call them over to you, or you say, a lot of people use a thank you protocol, like, thank you. The dog comes running, you give them a treat. And then a lot of times they'll go back and run right to the window again. What is super important about kind of the way that I train and the way a lot of my colleagues train is that we don't necessarily just leave good behavior desirable behavior up to chance. So we use the environment to our advantage a lot, meaning we try to set up the environment in a way that decreases the chances our dog can do undesirable behavior. And so, for example, with the window example, if the dog keeps running back to the window and running back to me and running back to the window and running back to me, I might maybe like move rooms or close the door and like get a nice good come away from the window rep and then not let them go back to the window. So because that way we're eliminating the opportunity for that undesirable behavior to get reinforced. Because remember, if they're doing the undesirable behavior, they're getting something out of it. So one of your best and most important interventions is eliminating the opportunity for that undesirable behavior to happen. That's why the management webinar is really helpful, because management is a huge piece of that, changing the environment to decrease the opportunity for unwanted behavior. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm just going to talk to you. And because now I can see my chat a little bit better. Okay. So I'm going to try to scroll back up. If your question was not answered, please, if it was like a while ago and you want to leave it again, that can help to make sure that I see it. You all have been so wonderful. I went way longer than I thought it was. I was like, oh, this will be a nice quick one. So there was a great question, and they're not on anymore, but they asked about reinforcement for small dogs. So dogs that are close to the ground, you notice I reward frequently. And as a Chihuahua mama myself, I can completely relate to that. I do a lot of like tossing treats right in front of my dog on the ground. And I also will sometimes use like a cooking spoon with something tasty on the end, like peanut butter or something like that. But I alternate between delivering food right to her mouth and then tossing onto the ground right in front of her, like in her line of sight so she can see it. So more questions kind of about food motivation. And remember, let's take the label of food motivation off of it. They are still motivated by food, but in some circumstances, they are unable to eat. And that ends up being more of a stress response. Do you rotate treats? Absolutely. I like to make sure that I've got a whole bunch of stuff that my dog likes that I can kind of rotate through so that she doesn't get sick of one or the other. On a way to a play date, a dog starts dragging this person to get there quickly. How do I encourage her to walk instead of pulling? So that's a trickier question than I can answer right now, but I really like how you phrase this question. I don't want the dog to pull. So how do I encourage her to walk instead? But that's kind of where the emotional piece comes into play. Like your dog is so excited to play with their friend. So they're like, see ya, don't care. And that is, that's where like working with a trainer can be really helpful to try to break through that emotional response, or to, maybe find a way that the root doesn't cause so much buildup. But that's a really good example of where emotions take over and their ability to make good choices is out the window. Great question. Question about the teenage phase. We've got a webinar on that. Teenagers are crazy. I mean that in the nicest way. They're just a lot. Somebody said my German Shepherd is very protective of me. So let's get rid of that label, protective, and what behavior are you seeing? And that would definitely be, if you're seeing barking, lunging, that's definitely something you want to talk to a trainer directly about. There's a good descriptor, barks at strangers. So again, labels can do you a disservice. It can help even the playing field, so we all know what we're talking about, but they also can prevent us from really understanding what exactly is going on. Okay, I'm going. Thanks for your patience. So somebody said that their dog is uninterested in treats out on walks. Love the description of uninterested in treats versus not food motivated. Working on stronger foundations in a quiet environment is absolutely what you should do. Practice at home a whole bunch. Okay, treats for a sensitive stomach. This would be more a question for your vet. And treats for a sensitive stomach is where I think that Google might be helpful for you. I typically do not recommend Google for dog stuff because like you're going to get crazy recommendations, but I think Googling sensitive treat options sensitive stomach treat options might be helpful here. I've got like boiled chicken, Cheerios, depending on the dog, can be a nice low value treat. Sweet potatoes for some dogs, single ingredient treats. So definitely talk to your vet about that. Pumpkin or yogurt, great. A lot of good suggestions about sensitive stomachs. Very good. Okay. A lot of questions about pulling on leash. Now, I have an interesting take on leash pulling these days. A few things. One, I think leash pulling is most often rooted in a need that our dogs have not being met. So that could be they need to be sniffing more, or they need to move more quickly and more, like they almost, more exercise isn't the right word, but they need to like run. So I recommend, first of all, a lot of leash walking practice at home, so your dog has the skills, but then pair that also with a longer leash. So maybe even like an 8 to 10 foot leash. Give your dog a little bit more space and let them sniff. A lot of times our dogs are just wanting to explore and sniff a little bit, and sniffing is so important for them. And so if you give them a little bit more leash, they naturally have a bit of a longer pace, quicker pace than we do. So give them a little bit more leash, let them sniff, have tasty treats ready for when they do check in, and always reinforce that. Consider exercising them ahead of time so they're not quite as ready to go. Even just like tossing a toy back and forth, playing some tug at home can be really helpful. So I take a really big picture approach to leash pulling, and try to get to a little bit more of the root of the issue. I think our dogs are, they've got dog needs, and they can feel so pent up, and they're so excited to be out in the outside world, and being stuck on leash can feel really frustrating. So I like to approach it from like, well, how can we get them their needs while also making the walk decent for you as well? All right. I'm cruising. So there's another question about a specific example of where a dog does an undesirable behavior, and then goes back to something that you do want. And my question to you would be, well, how can you prevent that undesirable behavior in the first place? Or replace that behavior and do proactive training sessions to get a more desirable behavior, and reinforce that instead. Like if you're having a sequence with your dog where your dog does something you don't like and then something you do like. So an example would be like they jump up on you, which you're trying to decrease, and then they sit, and like they sat. So you want to give them a treat, but then you have this loop of like jump up and sit, jump up and sit. I would ask you, how would you eliminate the sit part of that? The jump part of that equation. And it usually is like giving information about what you want a little quicker, preventing them from jumping on you with like a gate in between you, or putting them on leash, but not, again, just like leaving that bad behavior up to chance. Like, are you going to choose it or are you not? Well, let me decrease the chances that you might choose it. Oh, separating high value and low value treats in your treat pouch is usually just a matter of whatever system works for you. Like a lot of people will do baggies. Sometimes they have different little compartments. A lot of great ideas there. Okay, 2 dogs on walks. I'm sorry, my best advice to you is walk them separately, train them separately, and then consider putting them, kind of walking them together. But it's going to be really hard to change behaviors because what happens when you're walking 2 dogs or working with 2 dogs is naturally your timing and your mechanics are going to get worse because you've got double the creatures to keep track of. And so as we just learned, if our mechanics are off, then our dogs are not going to be as successful. Plus, you're dealing with some reactivity stuff that can feed into each other. So I usually recommend walking separately initially. Off-leash dog running up to your dog. Oh, that's a tough one. Demand barking. What is your dog demanding? Are they demanding attention? Well, why are they not getting enough attention from you? You always have to ask yourself, like, what's happening here? Like, what's underneath? What's motivating the behavior? Okay. Dog is in the yard to go to the bathroom, and the neighbor dogs come out, and the dog will not respond to come. So if we're thinking about another dog next to your dog in the yard, that's like peak distraction level. And you have to do training along the way. Maybe set up training scenarios where you have super tasty treats. You wait for the other, like best treat they've ever had. You wait for the other dog to come out. And this is after you've done a ton of coming when called practice, and then practice in a training scenario with the other dog around. But that's like on the scale of 0 to 100. A lot of dogs, that's like 100. And it's going to be really hard for them to, disengage from that, especially if they don't have enough practice. Okay, we've got 2 minutes. I'm going to see if I can get a quick question in. Value of treats is on Instagram. Thank you, Nicole. Okay. What about when the same views? Okay, there was a quick question about if your dog is doing something undesirable. So I'm going to use the example of barking out the window, and you gently just physically move him to another room to decompress. Absolutely. I am totally fine if you can in the least aversive way possible. And there's a lot of between treats and gently holding your dog's harness or your dog's collar, moving them physically away from whatever they are panicking about or getting upset about. Of course, please like take this depending on your own situation. If your dog redirects or anything like that, like don't do this. But in general, absolutely, I will physically remove an animal from a dog from a reaction if they're not calming down on their own, because I don't want to just let them continue to do that reaction. And I try to get to the desirable behavior as quickly as possible. Okay. A lot of good questions about preventing behaviors. So really consider going and checking out the management webinar. That'll help a lot of the reactivity questions coming up. All right. It is 3:59 Eastern Standard Time. I went the full 2 hours. I'm going to sign off now. So remember my email. Instagram is a great way to get in touch. And I do these webinars quarterly. So I will probably have one coming up in the spring. And please check out the other ones because they've got Your Dog's Friend has amazing talks. And I think you'll get a lot out of them. So thank you everyone so much for being here and hope to see you soon.